Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're going to give everyone just a couple more minutes, and then I'll go ahead and get started. But I just want to thank you all for joining us today. And if you've joined us in the last couple of sessions, yesterday and the day before, I want to thank you for that as well. But we're going to get started here in about a minute or two. Hope everyone's doing fine on this Friday morning. Hey, good morning, Delia, and everyone else from New Mexico. For those of y'all that have started to come in the last minute or so, we're going to wait just a couple more minutes before we get started. Good morning, Patty and Bo. All right, I'm like seeing representation all over the place here. We got New Mexico, Indiana, California. I'm in San Antonio, so good morning from Texas. All right. Well, Marty, I won't have to worry about you not understanding my y'alls and ain'ts, so that's pretty good coming from North Carolina. All right, everyone, it's about 10:02, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Once again, thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Jacob Law, and I am a sales engineer at Censis. Prior to this, I was also an implementation specialist, so I might have implemented some of y'all's sites over the last couple of years. But what we're going to cover today is we're going to cover traceability, and we're going to look at the 3 different modules that help us have asset traceability as far as what surgical sets and instruments we're using, how we're picking them, the strategies to pick them for our case cards, and then that final stage of using them in the procedure room using the case tracking module. And the way I'm going to run through this agenda today is I'm going to start off with a PowerPoint presentation. Just real brief, I'm going to kind of give us a high overview of what we're going to be looking at, and then I'll be using CensiTrac to kind of go in depth into some of these specific settings and considerations. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. As mentioned in the chat box, if anyone has any questions, please don't hesitate to let us know, but we will have a Q&A at the end of this morning's session. So please feel free to enter any questions into the chat box, and we'll address those towards the end of this presentation. I'm going to go ahead and get started. So this is, once again, kind of our agenda today. The first thing we're going to look at is the Censis OR Scheduler interface, and then we're going to look at case card assembly with the interface, and then closing that traceability loop with case tracking, specifically case tracking in the procedure room. I see that Stephanie says she can't hear me. Is anyone else having that issue? I want to make sure my mic is working fine for everybody.
I'm hearing you.
All right, perfect. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. So once again, we're going to move through the OR scheduler interface, case picking with the interface, case tracking management, and then case tracking in that procedure room. So before we get started, there's a lot of considerations when it comes to traceability. One of the most important things, especially I learned when I was implementing these modules specifically, is that every facility is entirely different when it comes to the workflow from beginning to end here. When it comes to the scheduler and our scheduling, there's a lot of questions we want to make sure we're aware of and we ask, and we know that the right parties involved are aware of CensiTrac and its use. So when it comes to the scheduler, one of the biggest ones is who manages our preference cards? Are those our specialty leads, our service leads? Do we have specific roles in the OR and or the SPD that help manage preference cards? It's a really important role to have down when using the OR scheduler interface. Another question, it relates to the OR scheduler as a learning module. And by learning, I mean it gets more aware the more we use it, the more we scan. And so we get questions like, why is my scheduler blue? And that'll make more sense when we see it in a moment. For those of you all that have experience with the OR scheduler, you might know exactly what I'm talking about when I mention an all blue schedule. For those of us that haven't been exposed to it yet, we'll see what that means here in a minute. When it comes to case cards, that's another process where it differs greatly from facility to facility. Who's picking our case cards? Where are these case cards picked? Is this a role that's primarily SPD, primarily the OR? Does materials and management help us out? Is it split? Does the OR pick soft goods and SPD pick instruments? There's a lot of questions that we want to make sure we're aware of when we talk about case picking. And then with case tracking, there's a lot of questions too to make it to best optimize its use here. Such as what's the best way to use our case ID barcodes? How do we get those? And then what particular CensiTrac settings affect case tracking? All of these considerations are really important into optimizing how we use these modules, especially if we want to make it as efficient as possible with your workflow. These are modules that it's really important to nail down using these in conjunction with what works best for your facility, because everyone is going to use these modules a little differently. So I'll go ahead and have these considerations kind of in the front of my mind as I move through the rest of this. And the first piece I want to discuss, which we'll see here in a moment, is the OR scheduler interface. So what our OR scheduler interface does is it imports your EMR or EHR schedule in addition to the preference card requirements that are needed for those procedures. And then what our scheduler does is it's not just a carbon copy of those schedules and the preference cards. It's an intelligent learning interface. And what it does is it compares your needs. So it compares what the preference cards are asking for as far as fulfillments or requirements. And it compares it to quote unquote haves. So what is CensiTrac aware of as far as what's sterile, what's not sterile. And then it begins to optimize asset use and prioritization. So we can also configure those reprocessing expectations. So for example, if something is in decontam, what's the estimated rough amount of time it's going to take until that's ready for use? If that same asset gets to container assembly or prep and pack, once again, about how long can we anticipate that asset until it's ready for use? So our OR scheduler interface takes what it learns from the import from your EMR or EHR. It takes those preference card needs, it compares it to what it has or what it's aware of in its current container and instrument inventory, and then it begins to prioritize for us. So when we actually look at the schedule, I'll kind of illustrate a way that we can see this and how it does it exactly. And just so we know, we've made quite a few changes to the interface over the last couple of years. We've grown from just being able to import things like containers to where now we can get the interface to import containers, peel packs, consumables, and even HLD assets with ScopeTrac Advanced, such as scopes and things. One of the key things to really understand when we're using the OR scheduler interface is how to interpret it. For those of us that have seen it, it looks pretty busy when you first open it. There's a lot of colors, there's a lot of icons. And so being able to understand what those mean and what they convey is really important. And the first thing is the key. At the top of the OR scheduler, we're going to see a key that kind of lays out the different statuses that we're going to be exposed to. And the ones that we're going to talk about a lot today are our priorities, such as stat, expedite, standard, and not available. So these can be configured. You can configure your interface to adjust the time frame. So how long what is the time frame before we consider something stat? What is the time frame before we consider something expedite? And what's the standard reprocessing or typical reprocessing time? And once again, that goes back on, we can configure the interface to understand or at least estimate how long it'll take for an asset to get from wherever it is to a sterile position. So once again, if something's in decontam, it's going to take roughly this amount of time before it's ready for use. And when it comes to case card assembly, case picking, once again, varies from facility to facility. And when assembling case cards with the interface, what we're going to be able to see is we're going to be able to see those preference cards. So you can build a case cart without the interface naturally. You can just scan a case cart in CensiTrac, pick the items that you're going to be using. But when you use case cart assembly in conjunction with the OR scheduler interface, it's going to go ahead and tie that case cart to that case ID. And then it's also going to populate the preference card requirements. So that way the person picking can see what those are on screen. And then it's also going to communicate back to the OR scheduler interface, which is really great. So if a case cart, if the begins to get picked, but it's not completed, we'll be able to see that on the OR scheduler interface. What are our incomplete carts and what assets are still needed to fulfill that case cart? If someone pilfers something off a case cart, maybe it's complete and then it's staged like in a hallway and somebody needs something, they'll come and grab it. And if they scan it off, we'll see that leave the case cart. So it'll go from a complete status back to incomplete things. So we'll be able to see what's happening to that case cart, communicate back to the OR scheduler interface as well. And here's just an example of that dropdown, which we'll see in a moment. So this is a dropdown that if we don't have the OR scheduler interface, we're not going to see in case cart assembly. But if we do have the OR scheduler interface, you're going to have this option to select a case first when building a case cart. So this is one of those big differences between having that scheduler interface and not having it, is first of all, just seeing this dropdown in case cart assembly. And if we notice there's just a list of cases with their times and dates. And then to close that traceability loop, the last step here is case tracking. And case tracking is a module designed specifically to let us scan what we're using to a case ID. That way we can then run reports. We can cross-reference that case ID with our EMR, EHR to have traceability down to the patient. And there's a lot of strategies to use this module as well. It's just like case cart assembly. We can ask ourselves a lot of questions. Who should be responsible for scanning and case tracking? How are we going to get our barcodes? There's a lot of considerations that go into using case tracking efficiently as well. And then here's just an example of what the case tracking module is going to look like when we scan a case cart to it that's already been picked. So there's also some things here that a lot of users may not be aware of, such as you can also scan your location in case tracking. So you don't have to do like a scan to the room and then open case tracking. You can kind of kill two birds with one stone there. You can open up case tracking, enter your case ID, scan the room number. And if we notice there on the bottom left, it says OR room 2. And then it'll also remember your physicians and procedures. So if you begin to type Dr. Miller, for example, you'll see that from a previous situation. You can select it and it'll also start to remember procedure names as well to expedite the process in case tracking. And then also what's important to know about case tracking is it's designed to work in kind of that malleable perioperative world where we might need something that wasn't originally on the preference card, or we might not use something that was on the preference card. So there's ways to add things to those case records. There's also ways to remove things from those case records. And then with a recent update that came out in the last year or so, we're also able to go back and adjust and edit those case numbers, which is really great, especially if we want to case track for like emergent cases. And you have to go back and you don't have a case number, right at that moment. You can enter something like emergent case and we can go back and readjust those case numbers. So once again, it's a malleable module as well, just like the OR scheduler interface, just like case cart assembly. There's a lot of different workflows, a lot of different strategies to use all three of these. And then once again, we're going to have a Q&A at the end. So what I'm going to go ahead and do now, y'all, is I'm going to go ahead and open up CensiTrac. I'm going to go ahead and log in with my bracelet here. And what we're going to look at first is the OR scheduler interface. So I'm going to come into our workflow menu. And then down here at the bottom left, we see a schedules module. And so when discussing the OR scheduler interface, it's important to note that what we're seeing once again is particular fields that we look for from your EMR EHR platform. So that could be Epic, it could be Cerner, it could be Meditech, etc. And then what we're doing is we're also pulling over those preference card needs. So I can see here, for example, if I look at this first case, I can see case 57127. Let me zoom in a little bit for us. Whenever I expand that particular case, I can then see what's on that preference card. So that's really valuable information there. I know not only the case, the time, but I can also see what those needs are. And then across the top here, I can see that key. So this is that key I referred to back in the PowerPoint. What are those statuses? What's the difference between standard, stat, expedite, and not available? And if I come down here, there's a case I like to use in particular to kind of illustrate how the OR scheduler knows what it knows, how it makes the decisions it makes. And I kind of use worst case scenario here. We notice we have a status of not available, which should be a line item blue in my OR scheduler. So what I want to do first is just kind of illustrate what information it pulls, how it looks at it, and then how it makes those decisions. And if I scroll down a little bit, I can see that I have case 58036 right here, which happens to be a 4 a.m. case on Saturday, which would be pretty miserable. And then I can also see that it's an OR room 1, and it's a Dr. Edwards procedure. But it's blue, and it also has our exclamation point, so it's not available. I can go ahead and expand that particular case and the preference card populates. I can see that this particular case requires a heart micro instrument set and a heart valve tray. And it's specifically the heart valve tray that is producing this none available location. So this is our problem child. This is the container that's setting off the case to be blue. I can expand that particular container, and then I see my inventory stocks of my heart valve tray. I can see that I have 1, 2, 3 heart valve trays. And if I scroll all the way over here to the right columns, I see that I have a schedule column, and I can see I have a due column. And if I look at heart valve tray number 1, I can see that it's already been allocated to be used in a Saturday 4 a.m. case, and that's case 5835. So heart valve tray 1 has already been allocated. Heart valve tray 2 has also been allocated for a Saturday 4 a.m. case. So that means 2 out of my 3 trays are already going to be in use at the same time. And then heart valve tray 3, if we notice on the far right, it's not allocating at all. So what's that? Why is the reason there? And if we come back to this location column, which tells me where these particular sets are, I can see that container 1 is in decontam, container 2 is in the OR, but more specifically, if we look at this prefix, they're at Metro General. And so if I come to this dropdown, we've talked about this a little bit over the last couple of days, but CensiTrac has the capability to host multiple servers or multiple facilities on a single server or multiple campuses. And that's exactly what's happening here. We have a Metro General campus and a West End campus. And container 1 is at a Metro General location. Container 2 is at a Metro General location. But container 3 is at West End. So it looks like we at Metro General lent container number 3 to our sister campus, West End. And what the OR scheduler interface is able to recognize is if heart valve tray 3 is not here, then there's no way I can use it in a procedure. That's why it's not allocating, and that's why we have none available. We have 3 requirements for this container, but we only have 2 on hand. And this let us know a day in advance. So we can go ahead and get on the phone with West End. We can ask them for that container back, or what we probably wouldn't want to do is call Dr. Edwards and tell him or her that they'd have to move that case up. But the best thing here is that the OR scheduler interface is just letting us know this issue, this hole essentially in our inventory needs a day in advance. And the schedule allocation column here is what it does constantly. That's why I mentioned earlier, it's a learning system. It takes what it knows based off scan points. What assets are where? Are they in decontam? Are they in sterilization? It then begins to project how long it should take to be ready if it's not for use. And then it begins to assign to cases. And those assignments to cases are being chosen to make an efficient reprocessing workflow. So it's going to go ahead and allocate into what makes the most sense mathematically. And this none available example, once again, just really illustrates how the scheduler interprets your preference cards, how it interprets your inventories, and then how it learns from what it knows, such as it knows heart valve tray 3 isn't here. It can't be used for a procedure if it's not here. And it's going to be using that intelligence constantly. It's going to be looking at what it knows, it's going to be looking at what we have, and it's going to compare it to what you need, and it's going to begin to prioritize for us. Now that we've seen kind of how it looks at your preference cards and the case data, let's go up to the top right here and click Configure. This is where we can start to determine how long those anticipations should be. Now we have some default timings in here, which are pretty standard. I don't think a lot of our customers feel the need to come in here and adjust these configurations too frequently because these are pretty typical as far as how long it's going to take something to be ready in one stage to another. But this is where you would come and determine or reconfigure those expectations. So how long should I anticipate something to take when it's in decontam? If I throw a stat status on it, how long should I anticipate it to be ready? Well, 30 minutes means that if I'm the person in decontam and I get a stat asset, it's expected of me to turn that over in decontam in roughly 30 minutes. If I'm in container assembly and something that's stat comes across my table, I'm expected to turn it over in roughly 10 minutes, at least get it to sterilization, et cetera. So this is how it's making those priorities. It's using these configuration tables to anticipate how long something should take from one stage to the other. And then what it does is it adds that whole process up. So what's the time in decontam plus the time in assembly? And then how long is it going to take to sterilize? And then that's where it comes up with what's a standard status, what's a stat status, what's an expedite status. So as we get closer to a case, if assets are in non-sterile areas, we're going to start to see these colors change. This first case is green because we're still in that standard window. I can work in typical fashion and I can have what I need ready on time. But as it gets closer to 5 p.m., if I'm still missing assets for this procedure, It's then going to go to expedite because my time window's gotten shorter. It's then going to go to stat because my time window's gotten even shorter. So we will see these colors and these statuses change based on those configurations. Now, there's a lot of information here, and there's also a lot of ways to view it. That's another thing I want to mention about the OR scheduler, is this default view we're looking at. To me, this is really useful for the OR environment. So if I'm a scrub tech or a circulating nurse or even the charge nurse, this is a really great way to look at my case schedule because I can see all my cases. I can expand a case and I can see my preference cards. I can then see where those assets are. So if I need something and I'm in the OR, I don't have to worry about bouncing between modules. I don't have to look at this screen to access my preference card. And then I don't have to go to containers to see where it's at. I can see what's on my preference card and what's the last known location of those sets. More importantly, I can even expand an individual container, just like I can in inventories, just like Kelly showed us yesterday. I can expand the neck tray, and then I can see all my iterations of my neck tray. So if neck tray number 1 is just not available, I can see where the other 4 might be. I can also expand an individual tray, so I can see its history, so I know who put it together, who sterilized it, etc. So there's a lot of encapsulated data in the OR scheduler that at the surface level might not be immediately visible. You can even pull up count sheets. Maybe a container comes up and a tech might have accidentally forgotten to put a count sheet in it. You can even pull up the count sheet for that container assembly right here on screen. So there's no more dependencies on if I need a second count sheet, or if there's any concerns about being able to access a digital one and having to leave modules, you can access your count sheet even for the trays that you might have in your procedure right here in the OR scheduler interface. Now, once again, this is a really helpful view for like nurses or maybe scrub techs, anybody in an OR environment. So like, for example, if I was a circulating nurse and I knew that I was going to be circulating with Dr. Edwards all day or Dr. Miller, another nice feature here, if you notice next to every data column, like for example, case reference, we have a little filter icon. And next to do, we have a filter icon. Next to room, we have a filter icon. So if I'm a circulating nurse and I know I'm going to be working with Dr. Edwards all day, I can actually filter out everything else. And then I just see the procedures that I'm going to be circulating for. Or if I know I'm working in a certain room, some of our facilities, we have very specialty specific rooms, like neuro's always in room 5, for example. You can even apply a filter to the room if you know that you're going to be working that room all day. That way you don't worry about all the other procedures that you're not going to be working. You can just see what's of concern to you this day or the next couple of days. So using these filters across the top makes it really easy to interpret for those end users, especially when we have a lot going on. If there's tons of cases, I might get kind of lost in the sauce here. So having these filters is a great way to hone in on the cases that are important to me for my day. Now, across the top here, there's quite a few filters and options. I can see that it's set to currently case status in all. So that's, once again, kind of the default view. This is really helpful for someone in the OR environment. But what if I'm in the SPD world? I'm not as concerned with the case schedule as I am with what I need to prepare and have sterile and ready to use. So I'm going to toggle this case status to item status, and I'm going to change this all to reprocessing only. And now what this is, it's looking at the same data, but from a different lens. It's not worried so much about case by case, it's worried about asset by asset. So this is essentially a needs list or a priority list, and it's organizing them in priority. So the thing that I need first is at the top, and then there's more assets subsequently as I go down. But if I scroll down here, I can see that this is essentially my needs list. So if this is something that we're doing manually, like maybe we have huddle every morning, and we go, it's a heavy ortho day, we need to get all of our ortho sets out today. Or it's Thursday, Dr. So-and-so's here, we know what that means. Let's get these certain sets out. If that's something we're doing manually or we're having to discuss, the OR scheduler interface is going to go ahead and do that for us, because it's going to do everything we just learned about a moment ago. And then it's going to be able to show us that same, intelligence, but for an SPD mindset. Because if I'm an SPD tech and I see, for example, case status and all, like on a big board in decontam, this isn't going to tell me much. But if I'm an SPD tech and I see item status and reprocessing only on a big board in decontam, I can just look at this item name column and I know what I should be prioritizing. So that's another great feature of this interface, is it's designed to be viewed from all the different types of end users that might be getting benefit from it, our OR end users as well as our SPD end users. There's another view here that I want to look at, and this is one that doesn't get used too often, but it's one of my favorites, especially when I would implement this. Is something I would love showing like charge nurses. If you change the toggle to summary across the top, it's really a high level breakdown. And then one of my favorite filters here, you can apply various filters to the summary view, is by service. I really like showing this to charge nurses, because then just at a glance, you can see what your case schedule is for the morning, for this AM column. You can see what your case schedule is for the evening. You can see how those break down by specialty. You can see how many preference card requirements are needed for that specialty for that day. And then you're going to be able to really quickly see if you have any holes, like none available, for example. Here's that heart valve tray. It's just populating as a 1 there. So I should really just be able to skim those last 2 columns. I should see all zeros. If I don't see a 0, that should immediately stick out to me as a charge nurse as an inventory gap that I'm going to have to figure out what's going on. And then it also breaks up my cases by morning and afternoon. So this also helps me, determine my rovers or my relief. Maybe I now know what my staffing needs are for the day based on the distribution of my case schedule. I also can have an idea of how many assets and things are going to be used in these procedures by specialty. So the summary view is just a really nice high-level overview of all of that data it's interpreting from our EMR, EHR, and then how that data from our EMR, EHR combines with what the interface knows about CensiTrac. So what containers do we have? Where are they at? What's ready? What's not? And then what specialties do those containers fall under? So there's a lot of information in this OR scheduler interface and a lot of different ways to look at it and interact with it. I just threw a lot at you. So if y'all have any questions, please, once again, just please keep them coming. We're going to go ahead and address them. But now that we've one thing I want to mention real quick before I move on to case card assembly is I can see an auto refresh here. Just so we're all aware, this is designed to refresh the screen that I'm looking at. Some of the questions we get is, I thought this was I thought, like, let's say you have a real-time HL7 interface, and that's a real-time interface. As something happens, let's say in Epic, it should happen here. So what this auto refresh is referring to, it's not referring to being updated from the EMR EHR. What that's referring to is just the screen you're looking at. And this is typically disabled, but this OR scheduler will stay pretty active and new if you're an end user, because what will happen is if I click main menu and then I come back into schedules, that's going to go ahead and refresh it for me. So this auto refresh can sometimes get a little confusing because it's not exactly speaking about the interface or what it's importing from our EMR EHR. It's referring to the actual screen you're looking at, but just backing out and going back into it's going to refresh it anyways. So I just wanted to clear that up because I've gotten quite a few questions about that. I thought this was a real-time interface. Why is the refresh disabled? No, that refresh just has to do with the actual screen you're looking at, not what it's interpreting on the back end from our EMR and EHRs. So now that we've seen the OR scheduler interface, we're going to go ahead and transition now to case card assembly. But before I do, I want to point out that you can also pick cases right here. So for example, if I pick this action menu for the first case, I see assemble cart right there. So this is where I'm going to pause for a moment and talk about that workflow. What works best for your facility? Do I want to pick case carts from the case cart assembly module, or do I want to pick case carts from the OR scheduler interface module? Both are viable options. They can both be used in conjunction with each other. The decision is really probably facility, preference, or even user preference. If we're not too concerned with how it's done, as long as it gets done, that's up to the end user, right? I prefer to use the case cart assembly module, while this person prefers to use the OR scheduler interface. But just know that we can assemble case carts 2 ways. We can either use the case cart assembly module, or we can go ahead and just assemble them right from the scheduler. I usually prefer building them from the scheduler, just because what I've noticed is there's usually an area, right? We usually have like a case cart picking area where we stage our empty carts, where we can go ahead and start picking our instruments. If we use the OR scheduler interface to pick case carts, I can just at a glance see about how many cases I have for tomorrow if I'm picking the day before. I can have really quick access to those preference cards here, multiple case preference cards. I can also see the locations. So it might make picking a little easier, based on just the information that's available to you if you're using the OR scheduler interface. But then, if you're not dependent on some of that information, using the case cart module is just fine. And that's where I'm going to go ahead and transition to next. So I'm going to come back to the main menu. I'm going to come into workflow, and I'm going to come right here to the right where it says case cart assembly. Now, I mentioned in my PowerPoint this dropdown here. Now, this dropdown is not going to be visible to you if you don't have the OR scheduler interface. All your screen's going to say is please scan a case cart barcode. If you do have the OR scheduler interface, this is going to be an option where the first thing you do instead of scanning the case cart is you pick the case that you're about to scan. So if I can visualize what this would look like, I would probably have a preference card in my hand. I can see the case that I'm about to pick for, and then I would go ahead and pick that case on CensiTrac. So I can go ahead and pick that case number, and then I get the instruction to scan a case cart barcode. So that's what I'm going to go ahead and do. I picked the first case. I'm going to scan a barcode that's on my case cart, and that preference card automatically pops up. So I can see I have kind of a variety here of things. I have containers, and I also have consumables like pipettes, and then I also have peel packs like basin sets. So this is an example of how we can interpret multiple asset types on your preference cards. And then if we notice in this quantity column, nothing's fulfilled. So it's telling me what I need to go pick, but right now this is an empty case card. I haven't picked anything. So I can go ahead and add my consumables. I can add my gauze. I can go ahead and click save and close for that gauze. I can go ahead and add a basin set. I don't have a peel pack basin set here with me, so I'm going to go ahead and add one this way. And then I'm going to go ahead and add some lab pipettes, which are some more consumables. Once we go ahead and pick those consumables, if that's something we're doing, that brings me to my containers. And I'm going to go ahead and go pick those now. So I'm going to go ahead and scan those containers. The first thing I'm going to scan is that Heart Micro Instruments. And if we notice, it fulfills that need. So these were white and the quantity was 0 out of 1. As soon as I scanned the Heart Micro Instruments, it grayed out and it fulfilled it with 1 out of 1. In addition, it also knows exactly what Heart Micro Instruments I scanned. It knows that I picked container 1 off the shelf. That's what I scanned to this case card. I'm then going to scan my heart valve tray. And let's say I go to find my Mayo heart tray and I don't have it. It's missing. Okay, so I'm going to have to wait until that turns around. So I'm going to go ahead and click close. I'm going to come back to the scheduler for a second. And here's that first case. It now says incomplete. So the OR scheduler interface knows that I began that process, but I'm not done yet. I can click incomplete carts, which is one of our filter options across the top. And then it immediately tells me what case is missing what asset. I need to go track down Mayo heart tray 2, because that's the most efficient one to use, and use it for this procedure. If I come back to case status and I expand it, it's also only going to show me now what's needed. So if we recall just a few moments ago, whenever I expanded this case, it showed me everything. But now that I've begun that picking process, when I expand the exact same case, it's only going to show me what I need. And then I can also, from the OR scheduler interface, finish that assembly. So I don't have to go back to case card assembly. If I happen to be in here, I can go ahead and click finish card assembly. It's going to bring me right back to case card assembly without me having to scan the case card. And then I can go ahead and scan that heart tray whenever I get one. Once I fulfilled this case card, I'm going to go ahead and stage it where it belongs. I can click close, and then I can go and pick my next case. And if we notice, it now turned white. So the status of that case has changed. It's no longer green and standard. It's now been fulfilled. It's white. It's picked. I don't have to worry about it. I can sleep well at night knowing that case 57127 is properly picked, unless someone comes and steals my stuff. So what happens if someone walks by and grabs one of my sets and happens to scan it to their room or their procedure? So let's see what happens. I'm going to walk by. I know that I need heart valve tray 4. I'm going to go and grab it off that case cart, and I'm going to scan it to my room. I'm in room 2. So I just pretty much pilfered Mayo heart tray 4 off that case cart that was just picked, and I scanned it to a different room or a different location. I'm going to come back in the scheduler, and that case has now gone back to a status of incomplete. So now it knows someone came and stole my heart tray and scanned it to a room. But what that also speaks volumes to is that this is a learning module, and it's highly dependent on user compliance. If someone came and grabbed that heart tray and they didn't scan it, the scheduler is going to just think it's still there, and then it's going to feed us false information. So it's highly imperative that we have scan compliance when we want to get the most out of the OR scheduler interface, because it's learning. It learns, it only knows what it knows. So if it knows incorrect information, it's going to give us incorrect information. So once again, if someone came and stole that heart tray and didn't scan it to their room, I would be none the wiser looking at this screen. So scan compliance is the primary driving factor to having an effective OR scheduler interface. But now that case card's incomplete, I'm going to have to go track down another heart tray in order to fulfill it. I'm going to go ahead and come back to the main menu. And just so we know, let's say I do go track it down, I can also just scan my case card from the main menu. I don't have to worry about going to OR scheduler, going to case card assembly. Another nice shortcut is I can just scan that case card, and it'll also bring me right back here to fulfill that pick. So I'm going to grab that heart tray. I'm going to click close. I'm going to go ahead and go back to the scheduler. Since I put that heart tray back, it's once again complete, and I can now see that it's complete and no longer green. So those are a couple of strategies to build out our case cards. We can use the case card assembly module in order to pick a case and then scan a case card, or we can go ahead and build our case cards just from the scheduler interface. So there's a couple of case card strategies. Now, once again, that goes back to who's responsible for this, right? Is it my SPD that's picking case cards? Is it my OR? Is it morning shift? Is it night shift? Maybe even materials management helps us. So So there's a lot of considerations into picking the best workflow. Do I want to scan here using this strategy? Do I want to train my users to use the scheduler? Do I want them to use the case card assembly module? Do I want to pick the day before? There's a lot of things we want to consider before nailing down that really effective workflow. But as we see, there's a lot of different ways that we can do that. So the next thing I'm going to talk about now is case tracking. So case tracking is taking everything that we've seen so far and actually having it traceable to a case number. Now, before I transition, the first thing I want to discuss is the barcode that's associated with those case IDs. And so I can see in this case reference column a bunch of numbers that are case specific. So 57127 is that first case ID. 57294 is that second case ID. Well, whenever we go to case tracking here in a moment, it's going to ask us to type or scan that case number. How do we scan a case number? Right? Like, where do we get that? So there's a lot of strategies, because one of the things that I would always break down when I would implement this module is I wouldn't even implement it for a day or two. I would always just watch who's picking my case cards, who's printing out my preference cards every morning. Is it somebody's responsibility to go and hand out preference cards? Or is it kind of, hey, if you're in room 2, get your own preference cards? There's a lot of different workflows out there. So I would always just watch for a day or two. I'd always just watch the OR and figure out what makes the most sense. So I'm going to go ahead and address the different ways we can get that case barcode to the user in the procedure room. And if we notice over here on the right, we have a print icon. Not to be confused with this print icon. This print icon would print just what I'm looking at, like a screenshot. This print icon that's actually in the OR scheduler, when I click it, I get 2 options. The first is print all case pick lists. What does that look like? So what that does is this goes ahead and prints your preference cards. And I know we can't see it because it's the way that it looks here. But if I were to actually print these out, there would be a barcode on top of this information. I could print this to PDF and show us what that would look like if someone's interested. But just know that what this looks like in real life when I click print is each one of these preference cards that I see is going to print on its own individual sheet. And then each one of those sheets is going to have a barcode at the top that I can then scan in case tracking. Well, does that work for my workflow? Does it make sense to print the CensiTrac preference card and rely on that in conjunction with our EMR generated preference card? Do we have someone that prints all these out every morning so I can staple them together? Is this something where somebody can go and lay out each one of these CensiTrac preference cards on the case cards in the morning? If this makes sense for your workflow, this might be a good strategy. But this might not make sense for your workflow. You might not have somebody that's designated to print out your preference cards every morning and go put them on tops of case cards. You might not have somebody that does something similar. So this might not be the best way to get your case ID barcode to your end user procedure room. But this is one way. We can print out CensiTrac generated preference cards, which will print off on their own individual sheets. And each sheet will have a barcode printed at the top that the user can scan to begin case tracking. So that's one strategy. When I click the second option, which is print all barcodes, this is another way to get these barcodes. And this consolidates the entire case schedule onto one sheet of paper with all the barcodes in one simple place. This works really well if you might be picking in one consolidated area. So we might have a case cart area where we pick, and then that also gives us the opportunity to go ahead and do the case tracking in that moment. I can go ahead and put this on a wall every day, and then I can pick for that first case. I can do the case tracking so I know what's going to be used in that procedure. And then I could take a Sharpie and line out the first case. Then I can move on to the second one. So this consolidated barcode sheet works really well, once again, if it makes sense for our workflow. Does it make sense to have all of our case IDs in one place? That way the user can move systematically through the case tracking. Or you could even print this out for every OR room. Maybe we just put one up in every OR room. And then when I'm case tracking, I can just find, the physician or the case number that I'm picking or case tracking, and then I can use that. So this is another option. Instead of having a preference card per, or I'm sorry, a barcode per preference card and a preference card per, sheet, we can instead consolidate all of our case barcodes onto one sheet. And this is another way to get this case ID barcode over here on the left to the end user in case tracking. So that's another strategy to get that barcode to the right person. The third way is I could print labels up here. And what that does, yep, I'm going to go ahead and print 21 labels. It prints out CensiTrac labels with that ID, with that barcode. So then what you could do, this might make more sense for your workflow. You might be using the preference card, let's say from Epic, right? Well, maybe it makes sense to print off my labels in the morning and just stick the barcode, on the corresponding preference card. Then all I have is one preference card that's from Epic, but I have a CensiTrac generated label that's on it that I can scan in case tracking. Maybe that makes more sense for your workflow. So there's a lot of, or you don't have to stick it on the preference card even. You could always stick it on an index card. You could stick it on, one of those index cards that goes on the side of a case cart slot. What's important to note is that we can just generate a CensiTrac generated barcode label using our label printers that we're using for everything else. So those are kind of the three primary strategies to get that case barcode to the end user in the procedure room, or when they're picking case cards, to go ahead and do the case tracking portion. So we have, preference cards with barcodes. We have a consolidated barcode sheet with all the barcodes, or we can print CensiTrac labels with each barcode on there. And if I scroll, we can see that I have, all 21 labels here for all the procedures that are currently populating on my interface. So once again, I just threw a lot of information at y'all, but that's a really important things to know, because a lot of these are kind of, they're nuanced really, right? Like, and they're also designed to fit what works best for me. I can't speak heavily enough, once again, when I would implement, I would really just watch, does it make most sense to print labels? Does it make most sense to print preference cards? Does it make most sense to just have one sheet with all the barcodes? What's going to work best for this facility? So being aware of all the different options that are available to us and knowing how to interact with them and what they do is really important to making that go hand in hand with our workflow. That way, this is as efficient as possible for our end users. I'm sure we're all aware if things get too complicated, scan compliance probably falls off a little bit. So if we can make something efficient, easy to understand, easy to remember, and that doesn't become an hindrance to my workflow, then we're really going to get that scan compliance. We're going to have that accurate records. We're going to be able to have really accurate case tracking records and things like that. So one of those big ones for me was always, how do I get this case ID barcode to the procedure room? And that's where I'm going to transition next, is to case tracking. So I'm going to go ahead and come to the main menu. I'm going to come into workflow, and I'm going to go ahead and come to case tracking. Now, case tracking, it's a pretty minimal module. It's designed for the end user in the OR room. So there's not a lot going on here. We understand that charting is a lot of work. We understand being a circulating nurse is really tedious. We understand being a scrub tech can be really tedious. So there's not a lot of interaction with this module. We try to keep it pretty simple, especially if you've built your case cart. I'm going to show us some options here in a second, because I'm going to kind of show us case tracking, kind of bare bones, and then we're going to go look at a few settings. But if you pick your case cart in conjunction with case tracking, it makes it even easier, which is something I'm going to talk about here in a moment. But once I'm in the case tracking module, what I see on the left is case information. What I see on the right is case items. What case? What am I using? And then it says right here, type or scan the case number. So that's going back to that conversation we just had about how do we scan a case number? What does that even mean? And that's going back to all those different strategies we have to get a barcode associated with that case number. You can also type it though. That's probably what I discourage is typing, because once again, I really want to make this as easy and efficient as possible for the end user. But it's nice to know we have a fail-safe, right? Maybe I didn't get my barcode sheet today and I'm in a hurry. I can always type a filler there, some sort of fill number, and I can go back and edit it and put in the correct number. But I'm going to go ahead and scan a case. So I have a case barcode here, and I can see that it populates. And then I can always enter my physician information here. Now in my demo environment, I don't have any physicians loaded, but just note that once you add a physician, they get added to a roster. And then once you start typing DR, all your doctors are going to populate. And the same goes for procedure. So I can go ahead and, it'll also remember the procedures that I'm having as well. And then on the right, once you scan this case number, you can then scan a location. I mentioned that in my PowerPoint. That's a little trick that not a lot of people might be aware of, is that you can kill, those two processes with one screen. I can scan my case number, I can scan my room number, and then what that'll do is that'll update those assets once I send this information. So it'll simultaneously create the case tracking record and update the latest location for whatever's been scanned to this case. I'm going to go ahead and scan that case cart that I scanned previously. Now look, all I did was scan the case cart and everything populated. So that's a setting that we have that makes it once again easier for the end user in the procedure room. So if we think about how this would work, if I'm like a circulating nurse or I'm a scrub tech responsible for this, my case cart comes in, I'm setting up my room, I come to case tracking, I scan that case barcode, whichever way I have it, I then scan the room number that I'm in, and all I have to do is scan the case cart, and as long as the case cart was picked, everything that's on it will populate. That way, for my work, it really should just be a verification. So if I'm the scrub tech, I should go, okay, I should have heart valve trait 1, heart micro instruments 1, and Mayo heart trait 4. I then should be able to look at my case cart and see those exact assets. If I see any discrepancies, then I'll have to, correct or mitigate that with the correct scans and removals. But let's say nothing changes out of the ordinary. Let's say what I get is what I see on screen. The procedure goes as scheduled. I don't need to go pull any other assets. I don't need to remove anything. I used everything that I'm seeing here. So this screen would really just stay up. And then at the end of the procedure, all I have to do is click send scan data, and that's going to save that record. So if we think about how many scans that was, I scan ID, I scan a location, I scan a case card. That is only 3 scans, and then I don't have to do anything else to have a proper case tracking record. Now, if something out of the ordinary happens, let's say I need to go get a camera. I didn't have a camera on my preference card, and all of a sudden I need one. I can always go, I can leave this screen up, and then I can go grab a camera. So we can see here at the bottom, I added something to this procedure that wasn't originally on the case card. So that's good to know. We can go ahead and add additional things to this. Let's say I end up not using something, I'm gonna return it to sterile storage, or I can return it to like a return cart. Let's say I end up not using my heart valve tray. I can click this red X, and it's gonna remove that tray from that case record. So we can add things that we might not have originally had picked, and we can remove things that we might not have used if we're gonna have some sort of return cart or some sort of, return to sterile storage or turnaround, workflow or process in our workflow. What's cool to note here too, is case tracking works with other asset types as well. For those of you all that might, use mobile track for equipment, you can also scan equipment. So if we want to scan like what pumps and things we're using, if we notice I just scanned a pump to this, you can also track equipment. And then if you're using Scope Track Advanced in conjunction with case tracking, you can also scan scopes and HLD assets. And if we notice, that's even going to have a serial number there because it's a serialized scope. And then I even have the ability to log bedside cleaning or point of use cleaning with that P over there. Those are some of the things Sam talked about a couple days ago. So case tracking is going to allow us to have traceability of what assets we're using on these procedures. And it's going to allow us to have really accurate records because we can update the location simultaneously. We can add items, we can remove items. I'm actually going to remove this scope and this piece of equipment real quick. And then the last thing I want to do real quick is I'm going to add a small sample set here. So I'm going to add one more tray to this procedure. And there's a reason for that, because I'm going to go look at some reports here in a second. So I added a couple sets to this. I updated my root location. My procedure is done, and I'm going to click send scan data. That then is going to create my case tracking report, so I can see what was used on this procedure. So this is just kind of like a mini example of what we would see in the actual reporting module. I'm going to click close. And what's great when you click close, it brings you right back to case tracking. So once again, if I'm like a circulating nurse, I don't have to worry about like coming back into this module. I can finish one procedure, break down my room, and I don't have to worry about CensiTrac navigating to a different screen or something. So that way, when it's time for me to use this module again, all I have to do, scan the case ID, scan the case card, and then business as usual, unless I need to go pick something or remove something I didn't use. So we've covered the OR scheduler interface, we've covered case card assembly, and we've covered case tracking. So what I'm going to spend about 4 or 5 minutes on before I start addressing some of y'all's questions is I'm going to go look at some of the reports that coincide with a lot of what we've just seen. So I'm going to come back to the main menu. I'm going to come down to reports. And in our reporting suite, we have a case tracking category all of its own. So if you expand case tracking, what you're going to see is about 6 or 7, I think, what is there, six reports, all relative to case tracking. And so I'm going to be able to know what containers and what assets were used in my procedures. I'm going to be able to cross-reference them, so I know all the cases this container was used on, vice versa. So these are pretty versatile reports, and a lot of them sound similar, but they do really different things. So for example, I'm going to come into case instrument details, and I'm going to click customize. Now this is instrument details. So that means that this report is really focused on the individual instruments that we're tracing, not the actual containers. That's going to be the container details one. So I'm going to go ahead and change a couple parameters here. I'm going to make this easy for us to digest. So I'm going to go show grand totals, show me a detailed report. I'm going to apply a filter to the case that I used today. So I'm going to go ahead and enter that case ID. And that's important to note, right? We're going to be able to apply filters to these case reports. So if I'm trying to find out what was used on just this case or what containers were used in these cases, I'm going to be able to apply some filters. So I'm going to focus just on the case that I looked at today. I'm going to pause for a moment though before I run it and let us just kind of view some of the data that's available to us in the instrument details report. I can see the catalog name of my instruments. I can see the serial numbers if applicable. Then I can see a mark number. And that's what I wanted to circle back to, mark number. What does that mean? Well, for those of us that are at the instrument level or CensiTrac Advanced, each one of our marked instruments goes through the process of what we call commissioning. And that's where we assign a unique mark number, which goes hand in hand with the UDI definition, a unique device identifier. That way each individual instrument has like its own fingerprint, right? So I'm going to go ahead and run this report, and I'm going to see quite a bit of data. But what I want to point out first is that small sample set that I scanned. Now, if we recall in case tracking, what did I scan? I only scanned the sample set. I did not scan a knife handle. I did not scan a Rochester. I did not scan a Metz. I certainly didn't scan 2 Babcocks. I didn't scan an Adair. With the Mayo heart tray, I didn't scan a cryowood, right? I didn't scan a tubing clamp. How does it know this? It knows exactly what instruments I used in this procedure. It's giving me a very specific traceability record, because when these sets were assembled, they were assembled at the instrument level, and the end user scanned the knife handle to the small sample set during assembly. The end user then scanned this Rochester forceps to the small sample set. So instead of clicking the little green button during assembly, these instruments were scanned to the containers. Now that benefit, pays massive dividends for this exact purpose we're looking at here. All I had to do was scan a small sample set, and CensiTrac knows, because of what happened in assembly, exactly what instruments were used on this procedure. I even know that UDI mark number. So this is giving us just a very granular level of traceability here that's not very possible without a system like this, right? If we're at the paper record, I can't tell you what exact Babcock I used. I know I used a Babcock, but I don't know that I used Babcock 0169 on that procedure. So the traceability goes far beyond just the container, depending on how we're using CensiTrac and how we're putting these sets together. The next one I want to talk about is right here. If I go to cross-reference detail, there's some options here that I want to speak about, because when it comes to doing any sort of root cause analysis, or we're trying to figure out what's going on, maybe we have a problem with infections, worst case scenario, and we need to use the data that we've created to help mitigate these problems. I'm sure we're all aware, sometimes it's a process, right? Maybe a container was just reprocessed incorrectly, and that's what caused the issue. But I have seen this firsthand. Maybe it's a room, right? Maybe a room's airflow is wrong. Room 3 has incorrect airflow, and all of our problems are coming out of room 3. Well, now that I know that, I need to know every case that was used in room 3, right? We even have a location filter here, right? So I can even look at my case data based on rooms. I can type in OR. I can just look at OR room 2, and then I can look at all the cases that were used in room 2, for example. And then I can even cross-reference the original case ID with those cross-reference cases. So there's quite a bit of ways to pull out all that traceability data that we're creating using those case tracking reports. So I threw a lot at y'all. So I'm going to go ahead and pause now. I'm going to come back to the main menu, and I'm going to go ahead and open up my PowerPoint here, just so we can have my nice Q&A screen. And I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes or so going through your questions and answering as many as I can. So I'm going to go ahead and start from the top here. I got a question from Chantel. So she's asking, can you manually add to the needs expedite list? You can. Now, it might not populate in the scheduler, but you can go ahead and assign priorities to those assets in the container inventory module. That's one of the things Kelly had covered yesterday well, that's one of the fields in container type. So if you edit a container type, you can make something always stat or always expedite. And then what's good about that is that those always stat and always expedites will show up at every stage of the reprocessing cycle. So for example, I'm going to open up CensiTrac again. When I'm in container assembly, if something's always stat or always expedite, it's going to immediately become visible to me when I'm in container assembly. That way I don't have to worry about toggling between the module that I'm using in prep and pack and then going back to the scheduler. I can just have visibility of those always stats, always expedites that I see here. Chantel, if you're referring specifically to the view where I had it set to like item status and reprocessing only, there's no way to manipulate that data. You can't just add a field to this scheduler table, but we have ways where you can see the same data throughout the rest of the application like we see here. And this priority list we're looking at it'll actually show up in decontam. So if I'm the decontam end user, it'll show up there. And then it'll show up in container assembly. And then one of our last patches that came out, I believe it was actually 417 in the current state we're at now, you can even turn on this priority list in sterilization. So if I go and scan a sterilizer, the priority list will show up there too. So if I have to make a last minute sterilization decision, pull that set off, put that set on because it's still on our stat list. So there's no way to manually change the scheduler interface table itself, but there is a way to make things always stat, always expedite, and then that information will show up consistently or kind of throughout the reprocessing cycle. All right, So that's a great question, Chantel. Thank you. Let's see. Next is Courtney. After the case is over, does it still keep track of what containers were scanned to the case? It does. Hopefully, hopefully the reporting showed us that right there. So they do fall off the scheduler though. So if I come into the scheduler, if we notice like this first one's fulfilled, when that 5 o'clock time frame happens, it's going to show this case for a few more minutes. But then, like, let's say by tomorrow, case 57127 is going to fall off that schedule. So we won't be able to see it, but the data is not going anywhere. All the data you create, we don't get rid of. If a scan occurs, you're going to have that data accessible to you via some sort of report. And we also maintain that data for 10 years locally, so you don't have to have any record retention concerns either there. So even when a case is over, even when a case falls off the scheduler from view, all the scanning that occurred is still going to be saved and able to be pulled out via a report. That's another great question. Let's see. Our next one comes from Tanya. Actually, it looks like this was a pretty popular question. How do we get consumables to populate? I'm going to go ahead and assume that y'all probably had the scheduler interface for a while, because this is one of the things that came out recently. So when the OR scheduler interface was first developed, it was, real quick, Courtney, no, there aren't any case card assembly reports today. That was just the very last question that came up real quick. And unfortunately, that's a really quick answer, is there aren't really any reports for case assembly or case card assembly. But back to the consumables here. So when the OR scheduler interface was first developed, it was primarily used for containers, right? So we didn't have the ability to feed over consumables. We didn't import that type of data, but we've developed and improved it to where we now can. So if you had the interface before we came out with that enhancement or improvement, just let us know, because then we'll be able to work with you to develop that and then import those pieces of data from your preference cards. It's really just our team looking at your scheduler interface and enabling what it's importing as far as what data we're looking for and what it's interpreting from the preference cards. A big piece of that, though, does fall on the EMR EHR side. A lot of how we import what we see is how it's built originally. So if you don't have consumables in certain fields on your EMR or EHR side, we might have to work with like your analyst or something to make sure that we can import and interpret the correct information. So I would say just let us know if you want to see consumables on your CensiTrac interface. Let us know. We'll begin that project with you. We'll get with the teams. We'll get with your team. We'll get with our team. That's something that we would be able to develop. But if you don't see it today, don't worry. It doesn't mean your system's broken. It just means that we haven't developed it yet, or it's something that wasn't in scope or something like that. Let's see. What if you don't have the OR scheduler? Can you oh wait, I'm going back up there. Can you manually add to the needs expedite list? I'm thinking, Chantel, what you're saying is if we don't have the scheduler, can we still see that priority list show up, like in case card assembly and stuff? And you can. It just requires you to set those always stat or always expedite settings to your containers. And then Ian is asking, what scheduler systems are compatible with seamless interoperability with the CensiTrac system? So currently, we have quite a few. We currently interface with Epic, Meditech, and Cerner most frequently. And with those, we can also interface what we call HL7 or real time with Cerner and Epic, and then a flat file or like a periodic interval interface with all three. So those are our three primary ones. I'm actually not too familiar with any of the other ones that we've interfaced with. That doesn't mean we haven't. I just personally haven't been exposed to those. So Ian, I could probably get you a more solid answer. But I know that Epic, Meditech, and Cerner are the three that I would see the most frequently. And then, is there a reason why when we scan a case card in Decontam from either Decontam or the actual Decontam module, we see the case card open with tray contents opposed to just scan? Yeah, that's a great question. So Martin, the reason that function, so if anyone's kind of unclear of what Martin's asking, when I'm in Decontam and I scan a case card that's been picked, what happens is it shows me what's on it, right? So all I scanned was the case card, but then it populates all the stuff that was on it, right? Now this doesn't one fell swoop scan everything, right? This doesn't account for all these assets. I still have to go scan my heart valve tray to give myself credit for that heart valve tray. Now, the reason it's built like this is I'm sure we're all aware, just because we picked a case cart and sent it to the room one way, that doesn't mean that's how we're going to get it in Decontam. So that's why, one, we have to scan the cart and all the contents that are on it. But two, the reason it shows us this is just so the person in Decontam knows what to anticipate. So case cart one should have these trays on there. And if they're not on there, maybe they're on an adjacent cart, maybe they're coming down the elevator on another cart. But this is really just for awareness, right? So if I'm the person that's decontaminating, I should scan case cart 1, and these are the things I should be seeing, except, naturally, without the consumables are probably in the trash. But I'm going to go ahead and, if I scan a heart valve tray, if you notice, it falls off the case cart. So if I am decontaminating and the case cart came down how it was sent out, I should scan the case cart, and then I should scan the trays that are on it. So I can scan the case cart, and then I should see a heart micro instruments tray. I scan that, it falls off the case cart. I then see a Mayo heart tray, I should scan that, it falls off the case cart. So this isn't something that's wrong or not working properly. It's just visibility, really. It's so the person in decontam is aware of how the cart that they're handling was picked and how it was utilized. Once again, so they should be anticipating, or at least be aware of what assets they're going to be reprocessing. But once again, it's still our responsibility to scan each and every set, because scanning the case cart just says the case cart's in decontam. It doesn't say that those sets are on there. Another functionality here is scanning a case cart to decontam also empties it. So if y'all have ever had that situation where you're picking a case cart and you scan an empty case cart, then you see stuff on it on CensiTrac, but you're physically looking at it and it's empty, that means it probably got skipped in decontam. Because when you scan a cart in decontam, it automatically guts it. It dumps all the contents. That way it's ready for use when it gets to case cart picking time. We're coming up right on the hour. I think as long-winded as I usually am, that came up right on it. So we covered a lot of information. Y'all had some great questions. If anything else comes up, please let us know. Please give us some more questions, and then please don't hesitate to ask us this afternoon as well. But once again,
sorry, Jacob, you actually had one more question just come in.
I see now. Do we have to have the OR interface to upload doctor preference cards in the schedules? Yep, we do. Bo, that's something that's kind of dependent. Is the scheduler, it requires some sort of import from your EMR EHR platform. There's not a way to interpret this information without that interface. So we can't upload preference cards without knowing what it knows from the EMR EHR platform. So that is dependent on that interface.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jacob. And just a reminder, in the chat, you have your link to your CE certificate with that keyword being OR scheduler interface.
All right, I'll stay on just for a minute or two. So if anyone wants to copy and paste that or anything, or it's a selection, I think. But once again, there was one more question. Let's see. Let me see if I can find it. Did I miss it? Because Matt, I've noticed that. Oh, sorry, that was the very first one. Or I just missed it there in the middle. I noticed that our OR scheduler will pick a non-sterile actual rather than the actual that's sterile on the shelf. Is setting issue on my end, or would there be another reason for this? It's picking. All right, so if I'm understanding this, if I come to the scheduler, it's allocating something that's not sterile, right? So like these are sterile because they're in a room in a storage shelf. I'm assuming we're saying it's picking things where its location is not in a sterile environment. If that's the situation, let me see. Let me go back to the question real quick. I've noticed that ROC will pick a non-sterile actual rather than the actual that's sterile on the shelf. It's a setting issue on my end. I'm actually not sure. I doubt that's a setting issue. It might have to do with the way your locations are configured. Without seeing the way that your CensiTrac's built, I wouldn't be able to immediately diagnose it. But just from my experience, the first thing I would probably check out is how your locations are built, because every location has what's called a process type associated with it. And there's only like 5. You can't configure those. And the 5 are like pre-op, post-op, decontam, container assembly, sterilization, and case cart assembly, which is also storage. So if your locations have incorrect process types that they should be, the OR scheduler might be confused. So it might think something is sterile when it really isn't, or vice versa. Once again, without seeing your data, I don't know exactly what might be causing that problem. But just from my experience, that's probably the very first thing I would check. Is I would just do an audit of your locations in CensiTrac and make sure that the process type is correct, because that's how the scheduler knows what it knows. It goes off that process type. But if that's not it, let us know, and we would be happy to diagnose that a little further. Let me come down here. Is there a way to use case tracking without the OR scheduler? Yeah. You have access to the module. It's just not as simple to use because you don't have a barcode. You're not going to be able to generate a barcode to get that case ID number. So it's hard in my experience to use it without the OR scheduler interface case tracking. because it's really hard to have consistent workflows, right? Because if I have a case ID number and a barcode, it's more simple for a department to do the same thing every day. If I'm using case tracking without the OR scheduler, it gets a little trickier because we have to make sure everyone's like 100% certain and aware and comfortable working the same process without having the luxury of having a barcode to scan and things like that. So you can use case tracking. It just gets a little trickier and a little more difficult to use easily. But absolutely, the functionality is still there. You can still add a case ID, you can still scan assets, you'll still have access to those reports.
All right, Jacob, thank you so much. Oh, we have Stuart coming in with one last question and then we'll wrap.
Yep, Stuart, can you clarify for me so this is kind of how I always break it down in my head. Where in the process does this location exist? Does it exist, in between container assembly and sterilization? Does it exist after sterilization? So when you say distribution, Stuart, where is that storage? Is that once something's already sterile? It's called pre-op. It's after sterilization. But it's not storage, right? I just want to make sure your distribution is separate from storage. Same. Okay, same. So storage should actually be case card assembly, so it shouldn't be pre-op. Pre-op is what like an OR room should be, so when we're staging outside of the room. So when we set up storage locations, I know the process type doesn't say storage, it says case card assembly, but anything that's sterile storage should have the process type of case card assembly. So that might be an issue if you're having any issues or out of sequence issues. Anything that's storage or distribution should be case card assembly for its process type. Yeah, absolutely. All right, y'all. Once again, thank you so much for joining me today. It was a blast. I love talking about this stuff. Y'all enjoy your breaks, and then I'll be seeing y'all this afternoon.
Thanks, Jacob. And just a reminder, all sessions will be on demand and available later on today. It'll be held on your Censis portal. So communication will be sent out about it. But make sure that you're registered on the Censis portal and you'll have access to all of the sessions this week, as well as the CE certification, that's the word, and all the other goodies that have been used for this week. So like Jacob just said, we'll see everyone who signed up for the 1 p.m. Central hands-on session in a few.
Yeah. Thank you again, everybody.